like to call the meeting to order for the Geneva Historic Preservation Commission for Tuesday, December 17th, 2019. Okay, I note that all commissioners are here, along with Mr. Lambert. Okay, the first item on our agenda is the approval of meeting minutes of November 19th, 2019. Any markups on those? If there's no, can I get a motion to approve them?
Motion to approve the meetings from, minutes from November 19th as presented.
A second?
Second.
Second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? No? Okay, motion passes. Next, we have our 5-minute field guide. Mr. Lambert.
Sash color, I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you, Chairman Zellmer. Lately, I've been asked frequently about the current fad of black windows on white houses and whether or not that's a historic look. Actually, that color trend is rooted in the early 19th century light-colored homes with dark-colored window sash. But more recently, actually just about a century ago this year, at the close of World War I, the U.S. Department of the Armed Forces had a surplus of white paint, which led to the painting of houses white with dark sash, often in black or dark green. But the use of window color is not as simple as it may seem and varies based on the architectural style. For example, the importance of the details of a window sash are often overlooked. Sometimes the number and configuration of panes in a sash are considered, but what about the color? The devil is in the detail is an idiom that refers to a catch or mysterious element hidden in the details, meaning that something might seem simple at first look, but will take more time and effort to complete than expected. In a simple vernacular cottage of the mid-19th century, the sash color provides depth to the simple massing of the Greek Revival style. The otherwise simple 1840s residence is transformed with the period-appropriate placement of accent colors on the sash and front door. Typically, exterior shutters would be painted the same color as the sash to unify an otherwise simple palette of either off-whites, grays, tans, or ochre. In an exuberant Queen Anne home, dark sash helped to provide additional visual depth to the complex palette of color. However, in a 20th century brick colonial home, light-colored sash, historically off-white or beige rather than the contemporary bright white, suggested that the trim was composed of stone to match other architectural details popular with the style. These two examples of the same window show how the application of a dark color at a window sash can transform the architectural character of a building. The correct painting of sash and trim accentuates the architectural detail of a window. On the left, you can see that the jamb is painted the same as the exterior casing, and just the sash are painted in the dark colors. Where on the right, the entire jamb is painted the same color as the sash. Incorrect painting of architectural details results in visual confusion as the various parts of the window become indistinguishable from one another. Unlike restored or replacement sash, complete replacement window units typically have additional casing or trim around the sash. While some window replacement companies allow sash of one color to be installed with different colored jambs, most companies do not offer that, and many architects and designers do not consider the option at all. However, permanent colored clad windows have a visual impact on historic architecture because of the additional trim. When complete replacement window units are of a color different from the exterior window trim, the result can be a bulkier or heavier addition to the historic architecture. When clad jambs are the same color as clad sashes, the result can look much like an incorrectly painted historic window. Yes, the devil is in the detail. The phrase derives from the earlier phrase, God is in the detail, expressing the idea that whatever one does should be done thoroughly. In other words, the details of any project are important, and that is exactly how the SOI standards are intended to provide guidance for the rehabilitation and restoration of historic buildings. Are there any questions?
Well, color is not normally our purview, but so if someone were installing windows, we could make a suggestion that, how would we approach that?
Yes, so the 5-minute field guide is intended not only to be an education tool for the commission, but also for those who may be watching it online or what have you. But it also helps us to consider when we are considering replacement windows for projects where color is considered, because the clad material is a semi-permanent or permanent material, which we do have the right to discuss color. So like I said, this rooted out of a lot of questions I've been feeling lately about, over the last couple of months, about this white and black fad right now, that whether or not that's an appropriate color scheme for historic districts.
Does Marvin allow separate colored sashes with,
I believe Marvin still does. They used to a few years ago. And I believe Eagle Window Corporation is another one that will do the different sash and jam liners as well. It's not, I've not seen it applied very often here in the Midwest, but I have seen it applied a lot in the East, where they're very particular about color and appropriate placement of it on historic buildings.
Well, there's a historic house on the south of the tracks that had all of their windows replaced recently, and I've had several conversations with people who were upset that the windows are a dark sash color, and it appears that this is now, this would be appropriate for that house, based on what you're saying.
Yes, if it's the house I have in mind, the dark color does help to recess and add further depth to that Victorian era paint scheme.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Now I know what to say when people ask me about that.
And you can tell them to watch the 5-minute field guide.
I will do that, from December 17th.
very good. Okay, we'll move on to our first review of building permit applications, 227 Ford Street. Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Chairman Zellmer. 227 Ford Street has been before us several times. It is located in the North Geneva Historic District, listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and again is in the northern reaches of our local Geneva Historic District. The property came to us several years ago under a previous owner with plans to do a renovation of the project. He left the Geneva area, and the current owners, Mike and Lisa Reby, have purchased the property and are in the process of continuing the rehabilitation that was previously planned. You may recall that some minor modifications were made to the plan, and the commission also approved those. At this time, the Rebys are coming forward with a request to replace the windows in the Ford Street and Third Street, Ford and 2nd Street elevations of the historic portion of the house that remains. And that is coming out of a discovery in the process of cleaning up the house. For those of you who may remember, this house was in pretty derelict condition. There was actually a question of whether anybody would even purchase it and rehab it. And so the Rebys have undertaken that and have gutted the building down to its shell, with the roof, perimeter walls, and foundation remaining. The house has a very interesting history because it dates back to John Chambers, who some of you remember was a carpenter who built a lot of homes in North Geneva. The actual date of the house is somewhere between 1846 and 1852, and it was first resided in by Jane Chambers, his sister, who, if you are remembering your history of North Geneva, Jane Chambers moved as often as John built a house, it seems. So she lived in lots of homes in North Geneva. It was purchased in 1852 by Simon and Mary Crum, who raised their 2 daughters there, and their daughter Kate ended up marrying William G. Canning and continued to live in the house until her death in 1927, and William Canning died in 1929. It then reverted to a niece who lived in Los Angeles, and apparently the house was occupied as rental property for about 5 years during the Great Depression, and then it was sold to L. Don and Ethel Manning, who undertook the first renovation of the home. It was the Mannings who moved the one-car garage to the rear that has now been demolished, but added that to the back for a bedroom and added a bathroom and some other things to the building. It's unclear whether or not they replaced windows in 1936 to 1947 when they lived there, or if the windows were replaced under William H. Warford, who was a local contractor, who we know for certain took 2 building permits out on this property. He added the kitchen that has since been removed in 1948, and between 1948 and 1950, he also added the one-room addition to the west that extends towards 2nd Street. So as part of the cleaning up of the property and the investigative demolition, the partial demolition, the windows have been exposed fully and are viewable now. They weren't very viewable 6 months ago. The property is not being rehabbed under the tax assessment freeze program, so, and it would not qualify for the tax assessment freeze program because of some of the work that's been undertaken, again, in large part because of the derelict condition of the home upon purchase. The one that I can say with certainty is that the windows in the, that exist today did not match the kitchen window that was known to have been installed by William H. Warford. That, again, that is gone now, but when I went to the house for the previous owner, that window did not match these. So it's unclear whether William Warford replaced these windows or the Mannings. So again, when this case first came before us with the previous owner, the goal was, and the representation was, that the windows in the house were of the 1850s vintage. Now that the windows are cleaned and viewable, it's apparent that the windows are not mid-19th century windows. That's why it's coming partially before you tonight. So just to go over a couple of things that you'd be looking for to identify a 19th century window are details of the construction of that period before better glues and stuff were developed. So one of them is the Morrison tenon construction of the rails and stiles, where you see a through tenon coming through the side rail. That joint continued to persist well into the 20th century, but was replaced in large part by many manufacturers by a different type of joint that I'll explain. Also, pegged construction was typical, or doweled construction, which would join and strengthen the window components, was typically found up until about the Civil War. And also in windows built before the 1860s, you would often find details of the Morrison tenon muttons coming actually through the rail and the stiles instead of just being pinned into the frame. The other things that we look for to help identify a mid-19th century window are muttons that replicate some of the detail of that era. So I've highlighted the 2 most prevalent window mutton profiles that were visible in northeastern Illinois at this time. So how do late 19th century and early 20th century windows differ from mid-19th century windows? Beginning around 1865, 1870, you started seeing the introduction of the bridle joint and the introduction of better glues, and so you would find window sash parts joined by this method, although tenon construction, like I said, did continue into the 20th century. Some of the other changes that occurred is that the muntins were no longer tenoned all the way through the rails, but instead have a tenon that is pinned into the sash in a much shallower pin or tenon, as shown in the lower image there. And then as shapers became available, a double OG type of mutton was more common in later windows of the late 19th and early 20th century. So the request that's coming forward then is to put replacement windows in at both the first and second floor. This diagram was in your package, your packet, so you should be familiar with it. It identifies, the entire packet identifies what the proposed work was, what the requested work was, including the addition of 2 non-existent windows that were approved on the west side of the building back in June of this year. So this is the second floor, so there are 20 window openings that are being considered for window replacement. Several are at the rear of the building that do not fall under our jurisdiction. So these are images of the windows as they exist today. The window casing is reminiscent of a early 20th century remodeling. It's a straight casing with a back band around the perimeter of the frame, which was again popularized in the 19-teens up through the 1940s. So that is one indication, at least the casing has been replaced. The windows themselves, in looking at them in detail, and I've tried to blow them up as much as possible, but the details are more reminiscent of a 20th century window. So again, this is not to say that the windows are not historic, but that the windows are not the 1850s era windows that they were originally thought to be. A detail of the sash pocket and the rope and pulley system. Again, the rope and pulley became popular around the Civil War, but more popularized towards the end of the 19th century. The proposed details are to install a replacement window that has been approved by this commission in the past for other projects. It's a Pella Architect Series window with muttons applied to both the interior and exterior face of the glass, with a 5/8 inch applied mutton, so that it would be a very narrow mutton like would be appropriate for the period. The details of the Architect Series by Pella does meet the requirements for appearance from per our window policy. So it's got a heavy bottom rail and then proportional meeting rails, top rails, and stiles. The color that's being proposed is iron ore or black. And again, we have an image of a 5/8 inch mutton and then a comparison with a 7/8 mutton. Very difficult to see the difference. I try to scale them as close as possible for these two windows. But they're proposing the 5/8 mutton, which would be the narrowest, which would be very typical of a mid-19th century window when the house was built. So that is the request and the case before you. At this time, I'd like to turn the podium over to Mike Reeby, who's the owner, who's making the request. So, Mike. This will take you forward, I'll take you back.
All right. Well, clearly, Michael just explained that much better than I could. So let's just open it up for questions that the committee has for myself in regards to the ask at hand or some of the detail that Michael just went through. And if there are no questions, we can just go to a vote.
You're replacing the side lights on the door. Is that whole door unit being replaced?
So we're actually not here to talk about the door, so we haven't talked
Well,
about
isn't
the front door or the
5
side door.
5 and 4, isn't that the side lights on the front door?
No, it's not, actually. So great question. So if you kind of follow through, the windows that are impacted by what Michael just went through are numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So those are all windows, not doors. And that's it. So on the lower level, those are the 7 windows that we're looking to replace. Number 10 and 11, those are net new windows that were previously approved by the committee. And then when it comes to 8 and 9, 8 was an existing window that we're asking to remove. And 9, you guys had previously approved for us to add a window, and we'd like to remove that. So again, if you guys remember, it's been about a 2-year run on this home. When we purchased the home, there was already conditional approval from the committee on the architectural plans that we had bought. Part of those plans was to add window 9. After we've started to really make it our own, we've decided that we no longer want window 9 nor 8. So again, I know I've thrown a lot at you, but as far as the window replacement, we're really talking about windows 1 through 7 on the lower level.
Commissioner Hiller, I'm going to go back so you can just see the front of the building because there are no side lights.
Yeah, I was looking at the older picture in here.
There you go. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
thank you.
Yeah. But, so apparently at one time it did have them, and then they took and changed the door.
The original, go back to the,
This one?
Yeah, the whole structure was taken down.
Yeah, I don't believe there's side lights back in that door, and when you look at the framing, it just looks like a transom was over that existing front door.
I'm looking at right next to their request. I don't know what page that is, page number 3 of 3. And it has a picture in there. I don't know what the date of the picture is, but
Oh, you're talking about the architectural plans?
I think he's talking about that one.
when was that picture taken?
I don't know, but I can tell you neither of those sidelights are there as today. The sidelights have now been removed, and there's just one.
Yeah, no, I could see that, you know, but I wondered when those appeared and disappeared.
Could even be shade, they could even be shutters.
There were shutters on the door, there were shutters on the
Yeah,
door.
I think they look like they're almost like shutters at that
It looks
point.
more, yeah, I agree, more like shutters.
Could be.
The shutter pintles are still on either side of the door.
Oh,
Well,
well,
that
that
answers the
explains
question
that.
then. Okay.
All right, so you want,
See what you're asking, yes, I got what you're asking.
I guess my question was, why do you want to replace them? I mean, I realize they weren't 1850s windows,
Sure.
but they were 100 years earlier or later.
Sure.
But what's the, is there a reason why you want to replace them?
There's a few reasons. First and foremost, if I'm looking at it through the eyes of the committee, we want to replace them because they'll be more period authentic. When you talk about the black painting versus white right now, as far as the 5/8 mullion, which I believe there's a little bit larger mullion today. I don't know if Michael mentioned it, but we will keep with all of the original exterior as far as having a true sill, the header crown, the side trim. We're not looking to do any sort of picture window. So from one perspective, it's keeping with the kind of period authentic Greek revival look of the home. And then secondly, I'd be remiss not to mention that clearly adding brand new windows versus rebuilding older windows are better for the longevity of the home. So it's a little bit of give and take in that once we got into it, once we started tearing it apart, once we realized the condition that that was in, this seems to be the best plan for everyone, both from us as the homeowners, as well as for the Historical Society to have a window that from the street view forward represents truly what would have been there at the time the home was built.
Is there this is a question for Michael, is there a period of significance on this? I mean, is that what,
The period of significance on this property would be from 1852, is what we had before, up to 1968, which is the period of significance for the North Historic District.
I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking, elements are all part of their respective times.
yeah, they are.
So we don't have real clear documentation. It's just basically conjecture when these windows were put in. Basically, we're thinking about 68, 70 years ago.
Correct. We know that William Warford did at least 2 remodelings of the home. We know that Eldon and Ethel Manning also did a remodeling, but it seemed to be less aggressive than what Mr. Warford did. But it's in one of those 2 periods that the windows apparently were replaced.
Okay, so by Secretary of Interior standard, having just by their virtue of their age, they've acquired historic value in their own right, according to the Secretary of Interior. And I'm kind of not seeing significant deterioration. In fact, they look pretty good.
Well, I think the other thing to look about is if when they put in the new windows, were they appropriate for the style of the house itself?
The windows, again, the window openings seem to be representative of what was there under Mr. Canning, who was also a carpenter. So it appears the window openings are the same. And the windows are multi-light windows, which would have been appropriate for the period. But again, are they purely authentic? No, but are they similar to what was there? Yes.
And our point is we want to make it period authentic versus restoring something that is greater than 50 years old, which I know is usually the state's view of what is historic. But again, as we look at the not going for the tax credit and trying to abide by more of the local legislation, we think that going with a window that is more authentic to the period and then also more updated from a homeowner's perspective is the right way to go.
Michael, can we go back to the slide where you listed the people who were living there and the last two homeowners who did, that's, yeah. So then, your thoughts, if I understood you correctly, are that the windows were probably not put in by Warford, because the Warford window that was in the back does not match these windows. Did I understand that correctly?
No, what I meant to convey to you is that it's impossible to tell whether they were done under Manning or Warford.
Okay.
The only thing I can say is that the 1948 window that faced the rear didn't have any connection to the rest of the house. There was doors separating the kitchen from the rest of the house.
I see.
Didn't have the same details, wasn't the same type of window at all that's in the
Okay.
rest of the house.
Okay, all right, so then I guess that means that we have to consider that the windows were installed in the mid-1950s.
Or 36 to 48, it could be either.
Correct. What's unclear in the research I've done on this house over the 2 years it's been before you is that Sarah Gilbert, I believe was her name, was the niece of the Cannings. She lived in Los Angeles and basically didn't, from what I can tell, did not do any maintenance or care of the house. So when it was sold to the Mannings, they undertook some fairly significant renovations, and then Warford went a step further. It's only safe to assume, because these windows are a heavier style and rail than would have been from a 19th century window, that the Mannings and the Warfords are the only two families who put significant amounts of money into rehabilitation of this house
I see.
at the beginning of the 20th century.
I see, okay, all right. Well, I guess I would have to say that I agree with our chairman and with Mr. Hiller that these windows have attained historic significance on their own. And we have had a number of discussions, I believe, in the recent past, that houses go through changes as families move in and out of a house, and that's part of the history of the house. And so that's significant to the house itself. So I would feel that these windows have their own historic significance for the house, and that they should not be replaced, is my thought.
I think you misunderstood my comments.
Oh,
on
sorry.
that. I'm trying to just find what my thoughts are on it, and I can see both sides of the coin, and I can see that, that if they were trying to bring something that looked, there's always that problem of false historicism when you deal with that, but a window is, we have let people decide where in that large amount of time they want to hit for their historic significance. And when you want to renovate a home. So I'm not sure that, saying that just because they're from 1955 or 50 or 38, they're historically significant just because they're old.
I have a question, if I may. There was discussion about relative condition. From how bad or good, what is the condition of these? Are they potentially salvageable at this point in time, or is this a major reconstruction to do these windows, or?
So we've had an initial look, and I do marketing technology for a living. So when people ask me a question like that, I always say, with time and money, anything's possible.
Sure.
So with time and money, everything is possible. It's major, right? We all know this house was in disrepair, and if we wouldn't have come up to take over, someone probably would have asked you to condemn it. So yes, with time and money being both unlimited, which I have neither of, they could be completely restored. However, it's going to be a significant project to the point that I don't know. I'll leave it at that. It's very significant.
I guess, was any kind of an estimate done on what it would take to?
I can't tell you, I can't quantify it exactly, so no, but it was, again, it was a lot.
Well, there was a house that, on South River Lane, that the family were torn between repairing the windows and replacing them. And in their experience, from what I remember, they decided that the windows on the primary facades, which was the west facade and the south facade, that they would have repaired. And the other facades, they put in new windows.
Sure.
And when I spoke to the wife, after the whole project was done, she told me that she was delighted that they had done that, because actually it ended up being cheaper for them to do that than to replace them with new windows. So occasionally it comes in that way.
Great.
Just a thought.
Okay.
I'm going back to, and is the sash in need of replacement as well, or is it just the operable window part of this?
The sashes need to be replaced, not all of them, some of them. Those that would be replaced would be milled to the exact specs. The terminology, I called it a die, you called it
A knife.
a knife.
Yeah.
So we'd make sure that it wasn't to
Okay.
look similar, but exact.
To answer your question a little bit, and to elaborate a little bit what Mr. Reeby's talking about, particularly, for instance, the two dormer windows that were added by Canning. They both are very close to roof structures, so those windows are in a little worse shape than some of the others. Some of the ones that are in really bad shape are on the back side of the house that aren't, again, under your purview. And then trying to think which one it is. I believe it's on the east side. One was in a little bit worse shape than some of the others. Again, I didn't look at every single window when I was out there visiting
Right.
them a couple of weeks ago. And I think the other point I want to bring up to you, and it's not a right or wrong, and it probably will muddy the waters not unintentionally, but I think what Paul and Commissioner Zelmer, Commissioner Hiller, and Commissioner Zinke are kind of betting back and forth is that, again, age isn't the primary factor of gaining historic significance. It's whether or not it has contributed to the historic understanding of the building. In this case, and this is a very unusual case that comes before the commission, oftentimes somebody who replaces the windows in a house over time, that's all they did. They came in, lived there for a while, and did some minor upgrades. In this particular house, everybody who has touched this house, who's lived here for a certain amount of time, has left their mark. So the question about gained historic significance is the Warford house that would have been there through the late 50s, early 60s, is that intact enough, and is that the overriding character? Is the Manning character, what's there? So you're really tied to the families whose imprint is still left upon the house. So we know that Canning added those dormers on the second floor, so he certainly has a mark made on the house. Warford did add that one-story wing. I know when it came forward originally, there was question about that one-story wing, how significant it was or how hurtful or impactful it was on the design. So those are the questions. Again, I don't have the answers for it, but those are the questions when you're applying age and that standard of gained historic significance that have to be settled in your mind.
If I could comment, because what I'm looking at here, and I get exactly what the other commissioners are going, and I understand exactly what you just explained, but, one of the other things that I'm concerned with right now is consistency in the way we evaluate windows, because we've had many windows over this past year.
We have.
Before us, and the thing is that in normally a case where we're replacing windows that have some age and significance to them, okay, we usually get some kind of an assessment as to whether or not they're restorable and what their cost is versus what it would be to replace them as new. And that works into what Carolyn was saying regarding, sometimes the cost factor is not as great as you're thinking, rather than just say, well, they're all in this, out of here. And that is not consistent with the way we've had to deal with this situation with other residents who have had other requests and said that, well, have you investigated getting them restored? Your answer is no. Okay, you said that they're gonna be significant, but you really don't have any data to back that up. Okay, and at the same time, we don't even know how much it's gonna cost to replace the new windows. So, well, when it comes to a lot of these changes, whether it's replacing or restoring siding, replacing and restoring windows, before we approve yay or nay, we usually like to have some facts and figures to validate that. And once again, over the last few years, especially we've done these with windows, I mean, we're realistic too. We're all homeowners.
Sure.
Okay, we get it. You know, and the thing is that, you know, there have been cases where to restore a window would be hundreds and hundreds of dollars versus a new one that would be significantly less for not much of a difference. And then there were some windows that were in excellent shape and were restored for less than it would have been a new replacement. But until that process is done, and until that investigation is made, okay, you're just kind of shooting from the hip here.
But at the same time, now you're inciting me to get a high quote to rebuild the window, and your decision on significant or not, replace or not, is based on my expense versus what is and what is not historic. So I think that brings in emotion into play, and in my perspective, the original say of keeping the windows was based on the fact that we thought the windows were unique to the 1850s home. And regardless, and I agree with what you said, but almost irrespective of the cost to do one or the other, if the original decision was based off of information that was provided inaccurately to the committee, I think the committee I'd like them to revise that irrespective of what the cost is, because that's really
We
not
don't know the cost.
an issue.
We don't have any cost.
Exactly, that's all my cost.
Well, when I asked the question, I tend to agree with George on this. When I asked the question, as an architectural engineer, I'd like to remove as much from the subjective
I would
decision
agree.
to add more objectivity to this. And this is another case, George, you reminded me about, we've had a few siding issues of the same. Oh,
Sure.
it's repairable, it's not repairable, and it was all relative, kind of. You can quantify these areas. You certainly can do some estimates and put some cost to it as well, to add as much objectivity to it as possible, so it's just not a totally subjective thing, oh, we think you ought to keep them, or it's okay not to. It just, from my perspective, helps the decision process a
Sure.
little.
I have nothing to add except thank you for stepping in and saving the house.
Well, that's kind of where just to put all the cards on the table, I think we're kind of missing the forest through the trees, because we are in good spirit, and I'm not going to try to craft this as I read online. We're trying to do our best to keep this house as it looks and as it would have been in the 1950s, plus clearly the addition on the back end. This conversation about the windows are in disrepair. I can get a quote to rebuild them or to add new ones. As a homeowner, as we all are, it's in our best interest from a cost perspective ongoing, as well as just from the stability of the window, to add new. And I thought by adding new, we're going to be able to be more consistent with what would have been there in the 1850s versus what was put in the 50s. So I really, in the spirit that we have not pushed back on a single item that the committee wanted when we got our initial architectural plans approved, I'm asking for a little leniency here on replacing these windows versus the consideration of replacing, when at the end of the day, again, forest through the trees from the street view in, there's absolutely no difference, and if anything, it'll look more consistent with period of the 1850s.
I do have one comment. If this home was built actually in the 1940s, would we be having a different conversation about this home?
I think we would.
Yeah.
I think we would definitely be saying that we would have to salvage the windows.
Salvage the windows,
And
yeah.
it's kind of, it comes to me is, what's the period of significance and where do we set that? And
If you're truly going back to period of significance, you would restore them as they were in 1847. You wouldn't be putting pillars in.
yeah, you do, you're kind of falling into the false historicism trap a little bit. Do you feel like that? I mean, is that?
I do. And I'm very sympathetic with your situation. but we have a couple other things to do. We need to be consistent with the people that have stood where you have.
Sure.
Right.
Over the past several years.
Right.
And also with the standards saying that replacement in kind is probably the action of last resort. And so I think for me to do both of those justice, I would need more information on the cost, as painful as that might take. And to think a little bit more about the period of historicity in order to affirmatively condemn.
Sure.
So what I'm hearing is the commission would like some more information before coming to a determination. Is that what I'm getting? Or are you feeling you have enough information to make a determination tonight? Because if it's more information that you're requesting, I think it would be fair to outline that you're looking, it sounds to me like you're looking for a cost estimate to restore the existing windows. And I believe you have a cost estimate from your window representative for these
Yeah, we've
windows.
never ordered them, but
So
I
you
can
have-
easily get that.
So you have that. Because
Analysis of condition. I mean, in the request, there was nothing mentioned about condition.
that was the third thing I was going to say. And again, in all fairness, one of the reasons this has come up and come to you, I think, is because, again, the extent of work that has been done in the house just to stabilize it, and looking at the number of new windows they're having versus the number of historic windows being remained, when we had that discussion, that's kind of what triggered it, is that, they're basically, I don't want to put words in your mouth, basically, they're building a new house here because it was in such deplorable condition. I mean, I don't know any of you who went through it when it was open, when the open house, but I know I had a lot of comments from people who just walked away from it shaking their heads because they didn't know what to do with this house. So I think that's the spirit in which they came without doing the actual assessment of the window valve itself. They're into this project to a certain economic level at this point that, and I'm not trying to argue their case for them, but I just want you to understand how it came to you without some of the other information that we normally would have requested. It was, I think windows are in the process of being ordered or maybe ordered for the addition, and it was just brought forward, if we can add these to the, to the project, we'd like to, because they basically rebuilt the house. So, like I said, it was, I just don't want you to think that they just came forward and decided to replace windows. It was actually because of the cost is what they first talked to me about, just how expensive this project is getting, and trying to keep their costs contained while preserving the house. So I just wanted to make that clear because they made that very clear when they first came to me. So,
Question, if the windows were confirmed to being 1850s circa, what would you be doing in that case?
Rebuilding them as per the recommendation of the committee during the first approval.
No, and once again, this is nothing singular to your project, whether
No,
it's just that,
agree.
and once again, it's part of the process. We've requested this consistently over the past. And to be fair to not only you, but others that come
Sure.
after, whenever we're looking at windows, and even windows from the 1930s to 1950s are now historically significant, and these are the rules and guidelines that we work with, is that, and we can all sit here and agree on, we've had situations where, where people have come up to us and said, I got to replace these windows with new ones and this and that. And when they came back to us with the information and showed exactly what's going on, we were, okay, But
Well, yeah, I'm looking at the Larrabee house.
correct.
We went through and we approved the fact that they were going to replace the windows rather than after an assessment was done. This is a great start to it. I mean, this is it's probably 90% of what we need. It's just that last 10% that we need, which is the refurbishment cost versus the
Replacement cost.
replacement cost. You
And
have
how
a
will the
replacement-
committee view those two costs, regardless of which one is the more expensive cost?
Well, I think it,
I don't think we can answer that question right now.
But based on, I want to, just out of curiosity, based on, I agree with what George said, that in all fairness to me, and all fairness to people that have come before and ahead of me, there has to be a level of consistency. So
Yeah, and I
if the
think-
rebuild cost is $1 and the other one's $1, or if there's $1 and $2, I'm just trying to get a sense of how that may be evaluated, or is that for a future
Our
meeting.
evaluations are by the city's window policy, and that's based on the Secretary of Interior standards. Now, Secretary of Interior is very specific
Sure.
about windows. So when we look at a window, we look at that policy and how does it fit into the standard. And actually, I looked at some of them, and Standard 2 says removal of historic material should be avoided. Okay, so that would, if we deem those windows historic, then you should avoid it. Standard 4, most properties change over time. Changes that have acquired historic significance shall be retained. So the Secretary of Interior standards recognize that buildings change over time, and some things then become added to it also
Sure.
become historic. Standard number 5, distinctive features shall be preserved. I don't know if it's a distinctive feature, but it talks about windows. Standard 6, deteriorated features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Well, that's kind of vague. I mean,
Yeah.
it depends on how deteriorated, and that's where if we say it's beyond repair, then that's fine,
And I think that's where the cost estimate comes in, too.
Absolutely.
is
Okay.
Because that tells us if it's going to be $1,000 to repair the window and $500 to replace it, well, that's not a very difficult situation for us to look at and say, we can't make you
Understand.
go that much farther, unless it was 2 windows.
Sure.
Right.
And we're talking about
Lots of windows.
7 plus 4, 11 windows, right, or
Yep.
something like that?
You're looking at a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 15 when you take in the upstairs, 6.
Yeah, I was looking at the ones
7,
that are,
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, pardon me, 12 windows.
yeah, because it was, I think you've got some that are in the back that we don't really.
Yeah,
have.
exactly.
Right.
I didn't mean to cut you.
No,
off.
it's okay. I wanted to mention Standard 9, exterior alterations shall not destroy historic materials. And then the Secretary of Interior offers guidelines beyond the standards on how basically you interpret the standards. And they recommend retaining and repairing historic windows when deteriorated. What's not recommended is removing repairable historic windows and replacing them with new windows for a perceived improvement in energy performance. So, I mean, they're very specific about what.
Sure.
And it's, these standards are reflected in the city's window policy.
Right.
So
That was going to ask. And again, I won't take any more time. 2 more questions, and I'm out. People ask me all the time how the home's coming, and I say ignorance is bliss, right? We had no idea really what we we're getting ourselves into, but we can't wait till it's done. But when it comes to the decision that this committee is making versus the decision that the state makes when they make their recommendations for tax freezes, I know the state looks at items to be over 50 years old as significant. Do you guys take that same view, or as I think about my home and the significant structure that's still there dating back to the 1850s, is significant what makes the 1850s home unique to that time period? Or do you also adopt and adapt that 50-year-old guideline when we think about everything that's in the home?
I would say that that's the changes over time, but
Yeah, I think,
It again depends on the building. Again, we've looked at buildings within the historic district that have had major alterations, say in the 1940s and 50s, that detracted from the historic character or the architectural character of the building. And there's been leniency there. We've had other buildings, I'm thinking right now of, 512 South Fifth Street, that, had changed dramatically over time from a 10 by 10 room or 10 by 10 house to the, 4,000 square foot home it is today. And again, every change in that period, in that building's life had some significance. And so those windows were all restored, if you remember. And some of those at great cost. But so again, the answer is, really, it's, again, determine what's historic. And I think you've got some homework, perhaps.
Sure.
I think the commission has some homework, because I'm hearing some question whether or not these windows that are there today are historic or have achieved historic significance in their own right. Some might hear them think it has, because they're there and they're at least 50 years old, and others are questioning whether or not they are. So again, I would think that if any of you want to walk up close to the house, or maybe the Reeby's will even let you in, you can see that the windows are definitely a 20th century window, not a 19th century. So if you're thinking you're restoring this, or you want this building to have an 1850s appearance only, those windows have a decidedly more 20th century type of proportion to them. If you're looking at the breadth of the house from 1846 to 1955, then that changes your perspective. So again, I think the commission has to decide a little bit of what is historic in this particular case. And I'm sorry, I've given you all the information I have on the Mannings and the Warfords and what I can find about them. Like I said, William Canning probably did some of the most significant things, but I think most of his work was torn out by the Mannings and the Warfords. And the Cannings certainly had the longest relationship with the house because of his wife having been born there. So this is not a straightforward one to just simply say it's historic because you can point to a particular builder or a particular family that lived there. It's got a lot of different pieces to the historic element.
When you look at the earliest Sanborn that this is on, how much of the house is in that picture?
In this picture, I'm trying to think, the earliest Sanborn only shows, I think, the front line of the house, but I believe if you go back as early as you can, it would be this form that you see in this picture. So,
Without the dormers, though?
without the dormers, correct.
But
That-
it was the L.
It was the L,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, see, that,
Like I said, the Mannings are the ones who moved the garage or built the garage. We're not sure what the origin of that garage is, but they're the ones who pushed it up against the house and added the bathroom and stuff on the first floor. Unfortunately, some of these houses weren't written about as much as we would like, so we get the whole historic picture. And like I said, I've dug as much as I can the 2 years this has been before us to try to figure out this one. But Warford was a fairly prolific builder and contractor in the whole area. He built and lived several places, so this is not his only home. The Mannings, like I said, were there for about 9 years, and they did major changes. In fact, it appears that they're the ones who changed the casing on the interior of the windows, but maybe Warford did, so it's hard to tell. But I've given you as much historic information as I think can be dug up on this property with my limited time.
so, go ahead.
Well, on a slide or two that you presented, Michael, there was different diagrams of typical joinery of mortise and tenon and some of the others. I'm kind of amazed that we can't narrow down to some degree when these went. Now, was that an actual picture of the window that one right there?
No,
No,
These are
typical
examples.
19th century
Yeah.
windows from northeast
So,
Illinois.
I mean, just by the joinery on these, I see this one photograph of the window taken out. I would think that we could get a little closer in terms of
Right.
when these were possibly made, then we don't know.
The windows are much closer to this style of construction, which is a 20th century style of construction. However, if you looked at and of course, every window manufacturer either held things over from
Right.
from other periods, but if you look, this one has a through tenon instead of a bridle joint.
Okay.
So it's a kind of a hybrid period there, but again, it could be a local window manufacturer that was holding over an old manufacturing technique.
Okay. So other than carbon dating,
I'll get a quote on that.
okay.
Yeah.
Would you mind going to this one really quick before we end, because I know that.
Michael, just so, okay, were you,
No, go ahead. No.
okay.
Just think-
Michael, I think the homeowners need to have a more concise idea of what we want.
I was going to get to that, but I think we'll wrap it up at that, but let him speak one more time.
Just on the spirit of leaving on a high note and letting me win on something, there were two asks, one of which were, if you look at 8 and 9, 9 is a new window, not currently there, approved by the committee back on the 6th of 19. We are looking to remove that. We no longer want that window that was previously approved. We'd also like to remove or drywall over window 8. So, again, that was the second half of what we asked for, and I just want to make sure before I step down that we had the opportunity to ask and maybe get a vote.
So both 8 and 9 will be gone and drywalled?
9 is currently not there, so yes, correct, it will be the same, and 8 would be removed slash drywalled. It will not be a window.
That's on the back side of the house to begin with, right?
Visible from the north, when you're approaching the property from the north, it is visible, that's why we reviewed it. But again, it is on the rear of the property. Remember again that this addition sticks out actually into the public right-of-way.
Yeah.
So it's highly visible just by the way it was constructed.
And all those shrubs that were there did a good job of hiding it.
Yes,
You're going to
Glad they're
need to
gone.
put shrubs up again.
that's her job.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think what we're looking for
Okay.
is a rehab number
Yep,
and your new window number,
correct.
and any visual evidence of deterioration by window. You've already done the survey.
Sure.
So it's just a matter of more detailed, like this specifically is what it looks like right now, so that we can kind of make a clear, concise, say, yeah, you're right, these are deteriorated beyond.
I can do that. And then, as Michael said, well, he didn't say this part, but, 3/4 of the once-done construction will be new. The windows that we're looking to replace in what we've talked about today will match the entire house. So if the committee can help for future discussions, help really pinpoint what is it that we're trying to be significant to, the 50s or 50 years old, that'll help us streamline any future discussions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
okay, being the nitpicker that I am,
correct.
are we asking for a window-by-window cost for repair?
Yeah, I would say a window
But
by, yeah.
how much window 1 would cost to be repaired? Window 2?
I think
Window
we
3.
want to do window by window.
Right.
I agree. I mean, I don't know whether you got that from my,
No, I was going to come with an all-in, so
okay.
thank you very much,
You're
Carolyn.
And the same thing with condition, window by
Yes,
window.
window by window condition also.
And per George's earlier comment, is there any guidelines by which you want us to determine condition? I mean, I could say red, yellow, green, but I don't think that'll suffice. So are there any, is there anything you want us to specifically call out when we're calling out the condition of the windows?
Usually when they're doing the assessment for the rehab, that's when it all kind of
Yeah,
comes
it'll
come
be
to play.
So typically, and again, I can help you through this or your window
Okay, we can
guy.
take it offline if
Yes,
you can help me with that.
Right, so.
Thank you.
But we would go kind of element by element of the window sash itself and evaluate that. And going back to, I think you're going to maybe discuss this after Mr. Eby sits down, but even though we have a window and siding policy, one of the issues that I've had as staff since coming here is that we have a policy, but we don't have a checklist of how you meet that policy.
Yeah,
And
that's
I'm
true.
working on that because it's been one of the more frustrating parts of trying to make sure it's apples for apples what I bring to you, but the policy doesn't really say you must bring this, this, and this. So we are working on that internally and hoping to have that before the spring construction season starts.
Very good.
If,
Party comment in support,
Go ahead.
in support of what's been said here. The Secretary of Standards actually says the standards are to be applied to a specific project in a reasonable manner, taking into consideration economic and technical feasibility.
Okay.
That's why
if I could clarify, Chairman Zelmer,
Yes.
the request for a window-by-window assessment or cost, are we thinking that we're going to be decisioning window by window, or is this going to be, I mean, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm looking more for, what,
Consistency?
if it's 12 windows, what's the cost to replace with new? And what's the cost to
Rehab.
refurbish, rehab?
I tend to think that consistency is important overall. I don't know whether, I think that but it's a judgment call at that point. I mean, I would look at, I think that's why we need window by window, because if we don't have window by window, it may be facade by facade then. I mean, because that would come down
That's what we'll
to-
do. We'll divide it up by window, and then by what's the 4th Street
Yeah,
view?
yeah, exactly.
What's the
And I
2nd
think
Street,
that
if you will, and
I
3rd.
could see saying, okay, it's very important on the 4th Street side that we keep all those windows, those are the best condition that they are. And then the ones on is it Ford? Or
Ford, yeah, Ford, Third, and then
Ford, that it would be, those could be that. So, I mean, I think it's kind of both, if you will.
And I do think that one of the complications that, again, applying the standards and applying owners' wishes and what have you on this particular house is it's not a tax assessment freeze project.
Correct.
We don't review interiors, and yet, just to kind of add a complicated factor from the owner's standpoint and the contractor pointed this out, this is basically one big open room on the first floor now. So if you find that 2 windows should be restored and 4 windows should not, it does have an impact on the visual character of the interior as well. So just again, keeping that in mind, that second floor, not as big of an issue because there's still rooms divided up. But because it's not a tax assessment freeze project, this is one large open room from east to west in the finished plan.
Okay.
And I would, if I was in charge here,
But you're not, but go ahead.
I
Suchi says first, maybe we want to vote.
I would think that being a historic preservation person, that I would prefer that there were as many historic windows in the open room as possible. And then that I would prefer that there were historic windows in the room, as many as was humanly possible, not humanly possible, as many as was reasonably possible, than to put in all new windows, because possibly 2 of the windows or 3 of them were beyond repair.
I understand. I just wanted you to be aware because we don't normally look at interiors.
Right.
But in this case, it's a little bit unusual. In almost all the other projects we've looked at, there's still been rooms retained.
Yeah.
In most cases. And
But
so-
we
so-
shouldn't, from what you just said, it seems to me that we should not even consider what it looks like on the inside.
I understand, but again, I was just bringing that to your attention that the owners have an aesthetic concern here as well. So, again, my job here is to kind of make sure everybody's hearing all
I
sides
think
of the story.
we want
so-
everyone to be happy in the end, hopefully.
So,
Okay.
and again, I would say that I think that while the Rebies are gathering this information and should be able to bring that back by the January meeting, I would think that the commission's probably going to have a discussion as to what is historically significant and what is not, and come to a consensus on that from the commission's standpoint, because I've heard a couple of different opinions this evening.
You have?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
You have.
So the significance is not the 30s to the 50s?
No.
The 1840s to the
Is
1960s.
it 1830s to 1960s? Is it 1830s to 1850, or 1850s to 1900? Is it,
Well, I thought it was 52 to 68. I wrote down, period of significance.
well, that is the period of significance, but we've allowed people to say in the past that I'm taking it back to 1850, or I'm taking it back to 1940.
Oh.
Well, because
Okay.
depending on what the committee as a whole decides is the historic significance.
Right.
To give an example, again, just to talk about the historicism of it, the previous owner had talked about taking the shingle siding off. It appears from the work, the Rebies have, how far they've gotten into it, that to take that shingle siding off would be kind of problematic because it appears that Warford doesn't have anything other than shingle siding.
Yeah, the structure would
on-
fall.
On his building, and the other has clapboard underneath the shingle siding. So that's where you have to have these discussions about gained historical significance or acquired significance, because just, again, and I did that 5-minute field guide on gained significance, but old does not necessarily mean historic, and historic means a lot of things to different people, and so it has to really, that's one of your tough jobs on this commission, is to make a determination of what is the significant architectural character overall and what are the significant details that contribute to that character.
And based on the initial approval, the building permit issuance, our loans, et cetera, the committee said that historic was 1853, right? So that's why we're now coming to you, because these are clearly not that. So to your point, Mr. Commissioner, that's what we need some help on. Can we get a vote on 8 and 9, and then I'll let you guys go?
Well, do we want to vote? I mean, we could.
Because those
do
are
we
part and
even have-
parcel.
Do we even have significance on 8 and 9?
They're visible from the north, like I said, but I think because you actually included those in your last motion, I think it's reasonable for you to have a motion to give direction to the Reeby's on those 2 windows.
Okay.
I think that's a reasonable request.
Okay, speaking of 8 and 9, does anyone have any issues with removing 9 or removing 8 and not putting in 9?
No.
No.
Okay, can I get a motion
I make a motion to approve the proposed changes to 227 Ford Street, eliminating the addition of window 9 and window 8.
Second.
Okay, I will call a roll. Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Hiller?
Aye.
Solomon?
Aye.
Stazen?
Aye.
Warner? Zinke?
Aye.
And Zelmer? Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you for your time. I know it took up a lot of it. I really appreciate it.
I thank you for your patience in getting through
Process.
this.
I'm learning.
It is a process.
All right, we'll see each other in another 30 days.
Yes. Okay. Our next item is Secretary's report, but you have some issues that you want to discuss, correct?
Correct. Some of these are just updates for you to understand what we do in between the meetings, what staff does on your behalf, and where things are resolved, and if you have concerns or questions, this is a time to bring them up. 201 North 3rd Street, you're very familiar with it. It's in the North Historic District. It's, again, another massive undertaking of a restoration and rehabilitation of an 1858 residence. If you've been by it, you've seen it's been progressing. The question was raised by Mr. Giampoli and his architect and builder about the insertion or addition of a metal flue to the building, and they've worked very hard to work it through the building so that it can come to the back side of the ridge. This is a tax assessment freeze project, so we have gone back and forth with the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office, and so the flue is visible from the north, directly from the west. As you can see, it's not visible from the southwest, the south, or the east. So the consensus of the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office and myself, acting on behalf of you, was that the flue was acceptable, even though it is somewhat visible, but we did request it to be painted out with heat-resistant paint to match the roof as closely as possible. So that's just being brought to you. Again, if you have concerns or questions or comments, if it had been on the front leading edge of the ridge, we would have definitely brought that back to you, and you have looked at doing things such as a false chimney breast or something else around the metal flue. But again, we're just bringing this to you to let you know what we've done so far and see that it is in keeping with what you would find acceptable.
Can you go back around to the west?
Right now, it's bare metal.
Yes.
How high is it?
Well, let's see if I can go back to here. If you look on this image, that element right there is not the flue. That's a 6-foot-high worker staying on the roof plane near the chimney. So the flue is shorter than him, and again, a 6-foot person standing on that side of the ridge was visible, but the flue is not.
So it didn't have to be higher than this ridge line.
It's set back far enough from this ridge line and to the northeast that they were able to make it virtually unseen from the majority of the perimeter of the property.
And it's not affected by the roof systems, the roofs for, because it usually has to be within 10 foot, it has to be 2 foot above, so.
Fine?
Okay. Good night. 318 North 2nd Street. again, this is another tax assessment freeze project. It's in the north portion of the historic district. If you remember, it is this property where they are doing some major rehabilitation and additions to this building as well. The addition is well underway. Again, was modified to comply with the SOI standards as interpreted by the State Preservation Office. So the question got to be, we had required them to restore the original proportional double-hung windows at the front porch and move the door was moved to the side of the porch. That work has been done. The request came to remove the synthetic siding beneath the porch and install 8-inch exposure composite siding in its place. In summary of the emails is this was my response back to the owner and to the State Historic Preservation Office, basically saying that the commission would support the removal of the synthetic siding, but would want to have the character defining exposure and finish of the wood siding that is on the rest of the historic portion of the house to be either restored by using salvage siding off the back of the home where the addition is going, or to use new wood. Unfortunately, the siding wasn't salvaged off the rear of the house when the addition was constructed, so there was no place to harvest historic siding from. And so the state concurred with staff's recommendation or requirement that the replacement material be smooth wood of the historic dimensions and exposure as found on the rest of the house beneath the synthetic siding. So the under area of the porch, which, if you remember, has had 8-inch hardy plank on it since 1990, will now have 4-inch wood siding, and the rest of the house will still be covered in the synthetic siding until that's removed at some point in the future. So that information was agreed to by the State Preservation Office on December 2nd, and on December 9th, Tom Wetmore, the contractor for the project, and I discussed this conclusion and agreed that that's what will be put on as 4-inch exposed wood siding. So again, if there's questions or comments, again, these are more brought to you because these are on street-facing facades, and so they really are under your purview, but we're acting on your behalf, so we want to make sure that it's very clear. And
So this area had like a hardy board, and the rest of the house is a synthetic, like a vinyl or a aluminum, or?
yes, so in 1990, the area under the porch was replaced with a hardy board or some kind of pressed board siding that was different than the aluminum siding on the rest of the house. Same
How
width,
did you
basically.
determine the four-inch reveal then?
Pardon?
How did you determine the 4-inch reveal?
Where they have taken off the synthetic siding to put the rear addition, it was 4-inch exposure.
Got it.
So the assumption is that eventually they will take off the aluminum siding and they will restore what's underneath there to match the, and that, and the siding on the porch and the house will then match each other in terms of reveal.
Correct, that's the intent of the Parkers, as they do that in a second phase.
Okay, good,
Okay?
yes.
So the last case before us, or the last thing I want to bring to you is a request for a modification of the storefront bulkhead at 307, 309 West State Street. You're familiar with that project. It is the former 1909 Kendall building that is being repurposed for the Nobel House restaurant. This was one of the, I think this was the second rendering of the proposed facade. These are the facade elevations that were submitted for approval by the commission back in September of 2018. At the October 15th, 2019 meeting, the commission approved the, increasing of the depth of the lintel between the display windows for Jim's, this lintel right here, approved the increase of the depth of that over the historic storefront to accommodate the transoms and the operable windows that have been proposed for the project. Since that time, code requires a fire department connection to the front of the building, or requires it to the building. It was originally proposed to be at the rear of the building. It's now being proposed to be moved to the front of the building. There are requirements for the installation of a fire department connection. The bottom of it needs to be 18 inches above grade minimum. It's approximately 8 inches in diameter for the backplate and the fixture itself. So it's roughly to the top of it is about 24 inches above grade is the minimum. The standard is a 30-degree bent sprinkler or fire department connection. The fire department is willing to go to a straight connection so that it can be as low as possible on the front of the building. Again, refreshing your memory, this is the earliest photograph we have of the Kendall building from about 1911 to 1914. And this is what it looks like currently as of today. This was taken at the lunch hour today. So they have framed it in with this bulkhead at this location. A couple of things to note is this is the limestone plinth. To familiarize yourself with the terms, this is limestone plinth. This is a brick pier that has a recessed panel that drops to this level, and then this is the bulkhead. One of the elements of the Kendall building is it's a very long horizontal building, so it has these very long horizontal lines from the original storefront to what's being proposed today. A couple of things to note from blowing up. Again, I apologize for the poor quality. This photograph is easier to see on a computer screen, but when you blow it up, you can see that the top of the bottom rail of the storefront window and the storefront sill are positioned above the limestone plinth of the brick piers, so a little bit taller than what this condition is framed at currently.
Up to that recess, it almost,
It's about another, it's about another 6, it's about 6 inches below that, it's 5/8 inches below that pier roughly, that recessed panel. So.
go back to the, okay,
Whoops,
there you go.
This one or this one? You want to be?
Yeah, well, actually,
You foresee what I was
that
gonna-
one tells me what the story.
So graphically, this tells you the story of how it kind of aligns and what aligned historically and where things are currently. So what it appears is that in blowing up and really looking at the details of the photograph is the bulkhead is actually a little bit taller than what's been proposed. And it looks like there was a baseboard at the bottom of the bulkhead to raise those panels up off the ground some. But you can see there is some available height to raise that bulkhead if need be to kind of replicate the historic condition. So the two proposals there is only one proposal that's been requested is a modification, just raise the center pier to or the center bulkhead to about 40 inches above grade to accommodate the fire department connection, which I've shown as a yellow dot. We don't have any detail submitted of what that would look like, what that panel would look like. The request is simply would a 40-inch panel be acceptable. I didn't feel comfortable with it being on the front of a major storefront that's gone through lots of review to confirm that that is indeed acceptable to the commission. So that's why it's coming before you. The other option would be to raise the bulkhead more to its historic character, maybe slightly higher, and just enough to accommodate the fire department connection and still retain that horizontal line all across the front. The preferred by the contractor, Dennis Kintop, who is here, was to put just a center panel and raise it at that one location. So the commission's kind of charge or issue is whether or not that is consistent with the historic character of the storefront, or if there's another solution, another solution such as this or some other solution you may come up with. This was staff's recommendation to be consistent with the general character of what the storefront looked like.
Is there an alley to the west of this building? I don't remember.
The alley is one building over. The turquoise building stands between this building and the alley.
But there's nothing between the.
Those are
between the
built right
turquoise
next to
building.
each
That's
other.
right, there's a stairway or something in there.
There's a stairway that goes up to the second floor of the turquoise building, yes.
Okay, so. it could be
Michael,
put
where's
inside.
Where's the cast iron pillars?
Cast iron pillars are right,
Yellow dot.
they're right here and right here.
Is this going to impact them at all?
No, no, the cast iron columns are being retained in the storefront. It's just a matter of the visual appearance of a panel or a change in the entire bulkhead height to accommodate the fire department connection. As I said, the connection originally was going to be at the rear alley that's on the north side, and that has been changed to move it to the front wall.
And the fire department made the change?
That is correct.
I spoke with the fire marshal, and the reason for that is that it's a dead-end alley with two commercial buildings either side, a transformer at one end, and there is a high possibility that if it was needed, it could not be easily accessed in the case of an emergency.
I have a question, if I may. Since we've had considerable discussion about many of the elements here, without going through all the minutes, was there any discussion originally on the sill height being lower than the historic height? I mean, at this late date, because of something brought in by the fire department, I don't know if I'd be comfortable reintroducing an issue that was approved by the commission at one time already to lower that sill height. And if there is this difference, I'm kind of surprised that we didn't have discussion on this earlier.
I think that, without going through the minutes, I think we assumed that the original thought was at 309 West State, they were gonna salvage the existing storefront. And so, I don't know what the sill height was at that time, whether we knew what that, but that was gonna set where the sill height was. I don't know whether that's actually what transpired or not, whether that sill height that you did for 309 State is the same as what it was before.
I wasn't involved.
Well, apparently not, and I guess
Well, I
that's
mean,
why
do we have
raised the
do we have
issue.
a,
Mr. Kintop is exactly right. He's come into the
Yeah, I know.
project to make
Right.
it, to complete it, to make
Yeah,
it work.
yeah.
The design details, I think the commission struggled with trying to understand how accurate or how complete the design details were for this project. Again, the idea was that the original storefront could be salvaged. There was no investigative demolition done until almost a year after it was first heard.
Right.
To determine the condition of that storefront. So I think, I know that this has been before the commission at least 5 meetings.
Right.
And it's been a challenge for the commission to understand exactly what they were being asked to approve as far as the detail. Again, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
And Mr. Kintop's trying to make it work now.
Now, the bulkhead, or the whole thing is, you said 24 inches high?
It'll be the same height either way. It won't be 40 inches tall if it's the center. We got 18 inches to the bottom of the pipe. Then I got a 4-inch pipe. I got that 9-inch ring. I got a 2 1/4 inch sill. It's got to be above that ring, right? You
Okay.
don't want to cut the sill out. So it's going to be somewhere around maybe 27 inches. Either way, it'll be the same height, whether it's a single or all the way across.
Okay, I guess that was my question, because in the drawing, it looked, the 40-inch one looked like it was, the plug looked higher.
Yeah, I figured it's probably around 31 inches, but I don't have the spec sheet on my
Okay,
fire department connection yet. It's as short as possible.
yeah, well, short as they allow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that,
18 inches off the ground is my code, and then whatever my materials are to get to the top but I want to keep it as small as possible.
oh, sure.
So according to what the fire marshal shared with me, he believed this was probably the minimum, was 24 inches, but Mr. Kindop's saying about 24 to 27 seems to be the height, so.
Because we don't want the sill is 2 1/4 inches thick.
and you want that sill over the
Gotta
top
get
of
that
it,
above
yeah,
that
yeah,
ring,
exactly.
And, maybe an inch above, so it just looks nicer than like the sill sitting on top of the ring doesn't There's just those little details that.
Is this gonna screw up the window unit too? I mean, the
All the
sliding
windows will be
windows?
smaller now by that. If it's 27 inches, they're gonna be 10 inches shorter.
I see. So you're gonna end up with that small bulkhead no matter what, I mean, right?
Well, it's whether I do just the center or all the way across. That's really the only question. I have to do it. I'm raising that center up.
Yeah.
Or the fire department won't, I mean, I don't know what I would do if he said I can't. I don't know what I would do. I don't,
What, yeah,
so it's really like, do you want the center or all the way across? For me, it's less expensive.
Sure,
As I look at it, I like it better all the way across.
looks nicer.
I look at the single one now, now you did that, Michael, and I mean, it just doesn't look right. It just looks stupid.
well, it's a little bit deceiving in that I think it's tall, the center one there is taller than what it really would be, but I think it does look more uniform all the way across. And I think that, I wouldn't have a problem having it go right up to the underside of the sill, because it's a round thing, and just that one little point is gonna be where it hits, you know?
That finish height, that central panel, whether it's one or all of them, is closer to the original height of the bulkhead than what we currently have?
Again, I can only do so much with the graphics I have available
Right,
here.
yeah, right.
But this is as close as I get to scale at about 24 inches. Mr. Kintop is saying 24 to 27, so
Right.
it'd be relatively close to what I
Yeah.
scaled out here.
But you go back to the old picture,
original.
the
That's what
picture,
I'm trying to
this one right
establish.
here is, trying to set where number one is, basically, and
It's tough.
that's tough, that is tough.
So one is higher than the historic.
One is the top of the bottom rail of the storefront window, the historic storefront window, the best I can scale off of the historic photograph.
Yeah, so there's,
So you've got a sill, and then you've got the.
Rail.
You've got the bottom rail of the sash.
yeah, so
So
that's
num-
probably 2 or 3 inches, maybe.
Yeah, it's usually pretty heavy on those,
Yeah,
about
yeah,
3 to
it
4
may be
inches maybe.
Yeah, 4 inches, and then
So when I looked at the details of the shop drawings of the proposed windows and how they're, not recessing, but kind of disguising that as much as possible with the sill that is being proposed, really that number one's kind of the height of the aluminum track for the operable windows is about where it would come out. The best I can, again, scale from what I have with drawings and photographs.
And the number one is how many
Go back to
inches?
the artist rendition.
That one?
No, keep going.
The colored.
The colored one of what it's gonna look like. Yeah, well, there we go.
that looks taller too.
Yeah, it does.
Well, that's
But these are old drawings.
Fortunately, yeah.
This is an old idea.
But that's what we saw originally when,
But I guess my question is that the center section there, that window was not gonna be movable anyway, is that correct?
Correct.
So, I mean, that,
It could be, you could make the point that it could be different.
yeah, I'm just saying, because it is the center and it looks like it would be kind of like of a logo thing, it could be kind of a center point of it, that if you didn't have any kind of a, if it was just, let's say, flat with not any of the detail on it, it would just kind of blend into nothing. But, I'm just, I think it looks better uniform across, but I'm just kind of.
I think actually it gets closer to what this rendering is if we
and
move
what
it up.
the original looks like. But
Yeah.
there's also freestanding standpipes.
That gets to be an issue, that gets to be an issue here because of IDOT right-of-way that goes to the face of the buildings.
Oh, okay.
So it's really got to be a building mounted from everything I've understood.
I don't want the guy that put in that sewer and water doing any more work in Geneva.
Oh, that's the fellow who's been down in the hole for the past 3 weeks. Is that the guy?
A job that should have taken 3 days.
It's been a mess there.
They do have
Do
freestanding.
we have a,
I personally prefer the higher height of the uniform look, but I don't think I have jurisdiction to say I prefer one over the other. I'm not an architect.
All I want to do is order the windows.
And
no,
the
let
windows
me
have
ask you
been
this, do we,
ordered yet?
I'd like to get a consensus, I mean, do we feel that, personally, I think that it should go all the way across, and it would look better that way. I think that it's actually probably closer to what originally was there,
I agree.
but, go ahead,
But
Michael.
I have a question first before I could say anything. Michael, could we go back to your drawing that's got the 1 and 2 and 3 on it? Okay, you said that, if I heard this correctly, that line number 1 is, as far as you're concerned, it's the bottoms of the window on the historic,
The bottom of the glass.
Bottom of the glass.
On the window, yes.
okay, bottom of the
historic,
glass. And that number 1 is that 24 inches from the street?
I can't, I have nothing I can, there's nothing I can actually scale off of the photograph. And I don't know if it's, if the photograph stretched a little bit, so I don't want to rely on that. I based it on, when I was able to blow it up, I looked at where it fell in that recessed panel of the brick. And it appears to be, that's why I put on the current photograph, it appears that was about in line with the bottom of the recessed panel on the pier.
And what's the height of that?
I know that. It is, it's 9 plus 2 bricks, so that's 11 bricks, so that's,
Take a picture of it.
it's like, I want to say it's 18 plus 5, I want to say it's 23 and 5/8 inches is what I recall.
To the bottom of the recess, or to
To the
the?
bottom, to
To line one?
the top of the bottom of the recess in the pier.
Or 8, right?
3 bricks or 8,
But, yeah.
To line 1
to line 1, yes.
But
from the
line
side?
one doesn't, they're not, are they synonymous on each side of this?
On both photographs?
Yeah.
As best I can, though, remember also, this projector distorts
Yeah,
all of our
I
images
know.
some.
I know.
So when it's on the
Yeah.
computer, it's square, it appears to be that, but again, I don't know if the original photograph's been stretched or whatever in the time it's
Yeah.
been reproduced. So again, I'm trying to give relative heights, and that's, again, I think what you're getting to and what I came to the conclusion is that it's better to have the sill a little bit higher and consistent across, and it's close to where it hit on the original.
Yeah.
We have no guarantee it hit exactly the bottom of that recessed brick, but it makes logical sense that was the intent of the original design. And so I think that if you're going to approve this, I would seek a motion, I would hope you'd make a motion that would say that the bottom of the sill shall be somewhere between 24 and 27 inches above finished grade, so that Mr. Kintop can then make it work in the field, and you all have a range of what you're comfortable with.
Okay.
And we could even say as low as possible, 27 to, or
It's the max or
24 to 28 or something like that.
And you'd be able to see that I can't cheat.
Yeah, I know.
Bottom of the pipe is 18, there's a ring, and then 2 1/4 sills, so
Yeah.
it'd be real easy to see that I did what I said.
Yeah, it depends on the manufacturer they use. The rings are anywhere from about 8 inches to about just under 9. I think it's 8 7/8 inches or something like that I saw online. So, he's got to accommodate that at least.
Yeah.
But what we're saying is that it would be the same height all the way across?
Correct.
It wouldn't be, the center wouldn't be, that it would be that one?
That's what I'm hearing for the majority of you
I
saying,
mean,
yes.
I would agree.
do we feel like we got a consensus on that at least?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
And I also think too, is that if you're looking at that, it's gonna be 27, 28 inches or whatever, that even when those windows are open and you've got chairs and tables there, it's not gonna be, you're still gonna be seeing
Right.
people's knees on the bar
Right.
table, so
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not like it's gonna really impede the look.
No, because they're like, the tops of the tables, I think, are 44.
Exactly.
The high top
So
ones,
while-
yeah.
While it's unfortunate the fire department came back with this late requirement, and it's a happy circumstance that that dimension is low enough to be deemed somewhat historic. Because
We
if
normally
they came
mount
back and
up
said
like
they,
36.
yeah, if they said they wanted this 48 inches, we'd be having a different conversation.
Plus the windows would be smaller, you might save a little cost there.
Well, it's less expensive for me to build a bulkhead than it is the glass.
Yeah, the load on those operable would be substantially less if you're shaving off about 8 inches off those windows.
These still have basically the same torque at the top. But
And
it's-
you're still-
right, it is slightly less.
You're still making the same number of window units, too. It's usually,
It just won't be as tall.
yeah, it's usually by unit, not by,
But
once you
it'll be
get to a
plenty
certain
tall
level.
enough.
Yeah, it will.
It will make it much
Do-
bigger.
Can I get,
And I'd be more than happy to work with Michael on, because I brought in a panel with our pieces on it, you know, for approval. I'll be happy to do the same thing, because we just would make the panels taller, if that was okay. You can look at it, make sure that.
I don't think you want to make the panels tall, you might make the panels tall, but the recessed panels are squares definitely. So I think there was a baseboard at the base, so I think that's your easiest solution.
Right, we're putting the baseboard on, yeah. So I'll work with you to make sure that
Sure.
you're happy.
Yeah, I can do that.
can I get will you,
I'll move to,
Do we?
We don't really need a motion, it's just on the sixth, so
We
I
don't
would just,
need
I
to
guess
make a
like a
motion.
straw poll or a consensus. I'm hearing a
Okay, well, I
consensus
think
that
we
we've got
have
the direction for
consensus.
24 to 27 inches,
I think-
minimal as possible.
Right,
as low as
No
possible?
minimum,
and uniform height.
uniform minimum.
But level, yeah.
Yeah, uniform height,
Yeah.
but high enough to be able to meet the code to install the sprinkler.
Correct.
I mean, install
There's
the
2
the
inches
pipe.
of difference across the building slopes 2 inches. So our bulkhead varies in height depending on where you would measure it. And Derek from the fire department did work very nicely with us. He played very nice, because if we had a 30-degree angle, it'd be 18 inches from the bottom of the 30-degree angle.
Oh,
So
my.
and that's what you normally have to do, is a 30-degree. So they were nice, you know.
That's good. That's
Very
good.
good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm ordering them tomorrow.
Okay, no more changes then.
Okay.
Gosh, I don't want it. I'll tell you that. I didn't want to have to come in this time. I was almost embarrassed at calling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
You as well.
So the
Any-
only
anything
other thing I
more?
have remaining in my secretary's report is, again, I just, as we've talked internally with staff, these are the kind of details I just try to keep informed of what goes on in the month between, because sometimes I'm refining a lot of the things that you've reviewed and trying to make sure I'm doing what the commission wants. So if I ever bring something forward to you that you scratch your head and wonder why I did something, that's what the purpose of bringing these forward for, so I can make the proper recommendations in between the meetings.
Very good.
Oh, I did have one other thing, just so you know, from a permit standpoint, I haven't talked about permits lately, about the volume we've done. This was a very late spring to get things started because of the weather, and we are actually about 20 permits ahead of where we were at this time last year. So I'm guessing that I may be looking at a 20 to 30% increase of permits for the fiscal year over last year, which again was, each year has been a record year of just permit review.
Well, there's a lot of work happening in the historic district.
certainly is. Now, how are we going to deal with that period of significance for that one house that is just here?
I think we need to put on our, I think we have to come back with an idea of each commissioner's idea of what it is. I mean, don't you agree, Michael? I mean,
I do agree. I think this is a very difficult case in determining significance because while Warford made this fairly substantial addition to the house,
Which I wish they were taking off.
but it's not being taken off, so that has a big impact on what the architectural character of this
So
house is, because it's definitely
It's hard to
not
bring it back any farther before that without removing that stuff.
Right.
correct.
Right.
You know, I mean, the thing is, I see both sides of it, but my concern was the process.
that's true, and I thank you for bringing that up,
Yes,
because
yes.
it really does, we want to make sure that we ask for the same things every time, and that's your checklist.
And everybody talks, and all we did, there's no
Right.
public hearing,
Well,
We are-
but we're still on the
in
record.
air,
we're still,
so-
already,
Yeah.
so, whether it's with the church, whether it's anybody else, we want to,
Right.
as I said, I just don't want to say, well, I just want to take the windows out and, whoa, because we have other people who exactly through the process, you get a window by window assessment, what the cost is. I mean, they were totally shooting from the hip,
Correct.
and as George, give us something
Well, yeah,
a little
let's make it-
quantitative to look at.
Let's make it objective, but I didn't even want to bring it up, but the other concern is, are we sure that all 10 of those windows are from the same period?
I did walk through the entire house with them, and they are all of the same construction type.
Okay,
Yes.
because otherwise it would even further complicate the
yes,
issue.
yeah.
But yeah, I kind of, those vague terms like, they're pretty bad, or they
Yeah.
really need to be replaced.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
Kind of it's just a little too vague for me.
Right,
And,
right.
and I think we're all a little bit still fresh from that siding issue, because we went around and around and around on that. And there has to be people that can document this with a greater accuracy than, now, the windows is probably not significant enough, but certainly that siding, somebody could have told us exactly what the condition was and quantified the areas of it.
Well, again, every applicant has an interpretation of what our policy requires them to submit. Again, that's why we're working on more of a checklist, because you saw examples of one siding request, and then last month we had another siding request that was very detailed. It was very easy for you to comprehend. They're reading the same policy. It was just a choice of what was presented. So, and again, I don't have anything that specifically says I have to force somebody to provide this, this, and this. I recommend what they provide to you, but the policy doesn't say exactly provide this kind of quantification
A window-by-window survey
or
or...
siding
Who
or.
establishes that policy?
Policy was adopted by City Council after recommendation by the Commission.
So we could make a checklist
Yes.
policy if we wanted to.
It's not necessarily a policy. Staff routinely puts together things, and I would bring it back to the Commission, say, is this what you're looking for?
Yeah.
But staff routinely tries to come up with forms and improve our forms, improve our submittal requirements to meet the questions that you're hearing in front of the various commissions. It happens in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals, it happens in front of the Plan Commission. We're constantly trying to stay ahead of the questions that get asked or the presentations that are made.
This is gonna come up again and again and again.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It will.
And it would expedite our time as well.
As his, because I feel bad that they're going to have to wait another month to present to us.
But, yeah, I just, how bad is it? Well, it's pretty bad, that's.
How bad is pretty bad.
enough.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
As is the period of significance is in
Yes,
the eye of
yeah.
the beholder too, I think sometimes.
And I do think the business about replacing windows is really a real hard thing, because people will call in a salesman to look at their windows, and the salesman's job is to sell new windows.
Correct.
And they'll talk about how much they'll save energy-wise, and how these windows will look just as good 50 years from now than they will when they're installed. And we all know that that's not true, but they don't know that.
Well, there are some that, it may not be 50 years, but performance, energy, maintenance, that is significantly different. Not a lot, but those are high-end new windows as well. You're not gonna buy vinyl or
Yeah.
some of these other extrusions and get
Right.
that level of performance.
Right.
Well, they were not dealing with a low-end, Pella Architect Series is not a cheap window. So that's a
Yeah.
quality window, so.
Okay.
Okay, can I get a motion to?
Well, I just want to ask Michael, and do we have any more mill race information?
Again, nothing has come forward as far as the landmarked property. And again, I am not involved in the discussions about the redevelopment of the property. So if something comes up about the landmark building, I will let you know, but as far as anything happening at the site, I'm not privy to all that information.
And there's no conversation in City Hall about this?
The two staff members who are the contact or point people for the city are David DeGroot, who is
Right.
Director of Community Development, and Kathleen Timoshenko, who is Director of Economic Development.
Right.
They've been the ones coordinating the project from the inception of redevelopment of the property. So they're the ones who are having any meetings, but again, I'm not involved in those meetings, so I don't have any updates.
Okay.
Anything else?
Can I ask about one other?
That's what I'm here for.
The home that was at the corner of Fifth and Ford, where I think they took it to city council
Oh,
to
yes.
demo, and it was turned down. And then, what were they doing next, or is there any update on that, or?
Is that Sixth and Ford?
I heard it, no.
Fifth and Ford.
I heard at one point they were gonna sue the city, or maybe I misheard.
I think you got that right.
Not being a lawyer here, they have filed for a judicial review of the process. We have met with them since that time, but nothing has been resolved. I did get a call about the property today, so I don't know if it's been relisted for sale. I have no idea, but I did get a call about the property today, so that's the extent of what I know at this point.
So they're still pursuing, I guess, demolition or something.
Correct. They're still pursuing their options.
Okay,
And this is another winter.
thank you.
Another winter for the house to get even worse. Okay.
Okay. Anything else from the commission? Can I get a motion to adjourn? Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Good.